So we've got a Toro Personal Pace mower here. Customer brought it in, said it's leaking oil all over the place. This is the Toro TXP 159cc engine. It's made by Loncin. Took forever to get parts in, I can tell you that. The only thing they sell on this is an entire kit to get that crankcase gasket kit. So we had to order the 121-0425 seal kit as opposed to just getting a crankcase gasket kit. Now that's about 70 bucks, where a normal kit for something like that, for just a crankcase gasket, would have been, you know, $7 to $10. So one reason that this engine is a little bit inferior to others in my opinion, but you can see just kind of all the buildup around here of the oil. It's just all over the place. All up on the carbon stuff is probably a different thing, but it's leaking down here at the crankcase gasket. We're gonna go ahead and show you how to replace that. It's not a horrible thing, and we're gonna do the PTO seal while we're at it also, since we're right there. Now, we like to start off by going ahead and draining the oil and disconnecting everything up top. Draining the oil, we're just gonna remove the dipstick and tip it over on the side. Got a halfway decent amount of oil in it, otherwise I probably wouldn't have done it for the guy. I would have told him it wasn't worth fixing if he ran it low. Now this one's real easy for up top to disconnect everything. You basically just have that, and then up here you need to take the pull string off. It slides up and out. Nice and simple. Throw something down to catch all of our oil, and we flip it up. Pull it towards us a little. Okay. So they tell you on these you want to have the gas fully drained, that way you're not leaking anything all over the place. Definitely a good recommendation. You also want to unplug the spark plug. You don't want this thing accidentally starting. I've seen weirder things happen with people doing different things. Let's get us a good view here. It's a little better light too. So, what we want to do is we want to take the blade and the adapter and everything off first. Go ahead and get down to everything we need. Still draining into that on the back side, so that's good. That's a 14 millimeter. Now, if you need to know what kind of part number you're looking at on this, it's real easy on Toro's website. Loncin, not so easy. They say the only things available for the internals are the gaskets and seals. They don't give you any other part numbers or anything. In my opinion, it's one of the cheaper engines made and one of the cheaper companies out there. But many people like them. One of the reasons I don't is because of what I just mentioned with, you know, the whole kit being 69 bucks when a normal crankcase gasket should cost less than 10. So you want to pay attention to how all this comes off. I like to just keep it in the way it came off. A lot of people put these on backwards. When they put them back on, they'll try to put it on like this and it'll grab the plastic around as you're trying to spin. The marks on the back will be a good indicator of how it goes back on. Set that all to the side. And basically we just want to get this engine off of here so we can get to the crankcase gasket. And we also do the PTO seal while we're there. Alright, let's see here. Been a while since I've done one of these. I think there's actually two bolts on the top. They're 10 millimeter bolts that hold this whole assembly on. They just sit right opposite. Yeah, they're just on the top, kind of by that connector. And then there's little tabs, if I remember correctly, that make this sit all the way down in there. Yep, so there's little tabs that it kind of fits in. So once you get, there's a 10mm here and a 10mm here on the other side. I've taken those out on the other side and they fit in here. And then there's little tabs that this fits into. So if you just kind of push in and pull, the whole assembly comes off. Now when you put it back on there, you're gonna wanna make sure this all stays where it is and this lip goes back up underneath the other piece of plastic up top here. But we'll throw that to the side. Now we need to get that main, don't remember what size that is. Okay. Got a 7/8 there, it looks pretty good. Remove it. And then we're going to go ahead and also remove the 14 here that holds the brake assembly on. Now you do have to hold on to the back side, otherwise it'll just sit there and spin. And that's either a 9/16 or a 5/8. I can't remember which. Let's see here. 9/16 it looks like. 14mm also works for that. All right. We've got that off. This whole brake assembly you can just kind of pull out and pull towards you. Now it is spring loaded. There's a spring down here that has it on there, but we're not going to worry about that right now. We've just got it off. Now we're going to work this piece of the clutch off. Sometimes that's hard. This piece of the blade brake assembly, I mean, we've got it off. Now you want to check that bearing while you're here. If you're getting much noise from it or anything like that, you can go ahead and replace it. It's looking pretty good as far as right now. I just leave these bolts in there. You want to make sure they pop back in how they're supposed to when everything goes back together. Set that all to the side. And this just kind of came off. You've got two springs here going to it. We can go ahead and take those off. Just pull back and remove. And that can just be put to the side. And then this one here can stay in the same spot also. Now you don't have to mess with that at all. You can adjust the tension if you need to while you're here, but it doesn't have to happen. So I always like to check the bearing here also. Spin it if you're hearing a bunch of noise or anything. These bearings are in great shape. I'm not worried about it. Also check your belts. If your belts are in bad shape at all, nice easy time to do them while you're right here at the unit. So the back part, it comes off now, and all you do is grab from side to side and just kind of wiggle it back and forth and it'll come right off of there. So not too difficult on that part of it. And now we're already down to the engine, so we can get the bolts to the engine off. I believe they're just 14mm also. They are. I always like to do the top one last because it kind of holds the engine in the right spot while we're removing it. And what I like to do is I just like to grab on the engine on the other side. I'm going to put the dipstick back in since it's pretty well empty of oil by now. I don't want it spilling all over the place if it has a little bit left in it. We'll drain all the rest of that as we come. What I like to do is I like to just grab on the top of the engine, just a tiny bit. I got the air cleaner cover at the housing as I'm removing this last bolt at an angle, just to kind of hold the engine on here. And obviously you want to pay attention to how that came off because that'll go back on just the same way. I like to set it to the side kind of exactly how it goes back on. And I just grabbed a hold of the engine so it stayed in spot. So now we can flip it back down and the engine is completely free at that point. So we don't have anything holding that engine on. So we can pull it straight up and off. And go ahead and move our deck out of the way. We don't need it anymore right now. We're down to the end. Perfect, perfect. Pretty quick, easy process here to get down that far. Now from there, what we're gonna do we're going to go ahead and take the bolts out of the engine. Now we want to clean this whole engine before we go any further. You don't want any of that stuff getting inside the crankcase. Some glasses here. Now this one here, we quoted that the carburetor was going to need at least cleaned also on it because it wasn't running great. Once it started, I think it was surging real bad, which you will get some surging on these sometimes, but shouldn't be horrible. So what we'll do is we'll remove, and they're just 10mm bolts around the outside. Go ahead and remove all those. Now if you're just wanting to replace the PTO seal at this point, that's perfectly fine. You don't even have to take the engine off of the deck. You can, from here, you can either drill a hole and use a screw to pull it, or you can, if you don't have a drill, you can use a screwdriver and punch a hole in there with it. And then from there you can use some sort of puller or poker or anything like that to kind of dig around. Really depends on what tools you have at your disposal on what you'll be using for that. Not exactly rocket science, this stuff here. Now all these bolts are exactly the same size. You're not going to worry about where they go or anything like that. And there may be some residual oil left in there. I think we drained the majority of it, but that's no big deal. It was in pretty good shape. You'll just grab a hammer or a dead blow. Go ahead and lightly tap on the back side. Right, nice and easy. Now we did have, as you heard probably, our washer fell off. That's a thrust washer. You're going to want that to go right back on here, and you're going to want to make sure that your cam or nothing like that slides out. If it does, you'll want to make sure that your timing marks match up. There's timing marks on both the main gear, and there's also a thrust gear here, so make sure that doesn't fall off. But there's timing marks both on the gear here and on here. You want to make sure those notches, they should be dot to dot. Now I don't have the plug out at this point. Should have pulled it out to begin with. You should definitely have it off or out. It's easier to get all this back together if you have the plug out also. So because you're going to want to move this shaft one way or the other as you're putting it back together normally, and that just kind of helps everything just go back together. You can see this is the main spot that was blown out real bad. I mean, you can tell just like that, it's not even barely lined up to the point there. So just comes off nice and brittle over here. It's in a bad area too. What we're going to do is, at this point, we're going to go ahead and scrape the gasket material off everything, and then we're going to drive the seal, the PTO seal. We're just going to use a punch, and we're going to go through from the one side. We're going to go through from here, and we're just going to drive it out. So I'm going to drive that out of there. We're going to clean up all that crankcase gasket, and we're going to get this thing put back together. All it does is just push out one way or the other. I've started getting it out there, but you'll just push it out from the back side however you like to do it. It really doesn't matter as long as it comes out of there. You don't want to damage anything as you're doing it, but get that out of there, get this all cleaned up, and I'll show you how to put it back together. All right, so we're back. I've got everything scraped off here. What I like to do after I get everything scraped off is just take some isopropyl alcohol and wipe everything down. Make sure that it is 100% off of there. You want that as clean as can possibly be. If you've got anything left over, it can cause it to leak. Not something that, you know, there's some blemishes and stuff like that where you see coloring. The general rule of thumb is, as long as you can't feel it, as long as you can't put your fingernail on it or get caught on it, it's not there. So that's what I tell everyone anyway. We're going to open these back up, and I use razor blades to scrape all that off. It's up to you how you want to get your gasket material off, but if you're using a razor blade and it starts scraping in any way, shape, or form, you're going to want to replace it with a new one. Don't keep using that same old razor. As soon as it gets caught, a lot of times they'll start putting some pretty good dents, pretty good scratches into the unit. So we'll get this kit open, see what we got. So this is the whole gasket kit, again, that you have to buy in order to get the crankcase gasket. There it is, the $69 gasket apparently, since that's the only one that we really needed. And then you've got your 2 oil seals. I think the bigger one of the 2 is the one we need, but the rest of the stuff we're just going to leave in there, not worried about it. Nothing else is leaking at this point. Now I did want to point out that there are 2 dowel pins on here. So you can take those out as you're scraping. It makes it easier to get around them. But you want to make sure they go back in before you put everything back together. So I like to put them on the engine side. That way we can throw the gasket up there and get it easy to put back on. They kind of hold everything in place. Now you don't want to break this gasket, you don't want to tear it anywhere, otherwise we'll be right back in the same boat waiting again. It was on back order for, oh, I don't know, I think we ordered it sometime in November. It's the middle of January now, so 2.5, 3 months. It was on back order for quite a while. I did go ahead and get that out of there. We're going to go ahead and push a new one down in. Now you can do it quite a few different ways. You can do it with the socket since it's off. It makes it nice and easy if you get a nice big one. Let's see what size we need here. So if you do it that way, kind of pushing towards the outside, you're not damaging anything. And you just get that down in there evenly, seat it down in. Once it's down in there, we're good to go. So nice and easy, nice and even all the way around. Now we do like to grease that up. You can use penetrating grease is what we use. We use the Interlube, delayed viscosity penetrating grease. It goes on like a liquid, and then just to kind of coat everything up, make it easier as far as reassembly goes. And then we also, while we're here, I'm going to go ahead and take the dipstick off. Now it just makes it a little bit easier to put back together as you're not having to line it up as you're lining everything else back up. And I've got the gasket back up top, ready to go. And I've got the dowel pin inserted on both spots, everything lined up, everything was good up top here. We're going to spray a little bit on the journal here. Again, make sure that the thrust washers are here. There's one here and one here, and if your cam or anything came out, you're going to want to make sure that those timing marks have lined back up. Normally that won't happen, it's under pressure at that point, but everything just snaps back together, pushes back together. In theory, anyway. Right. Pretty close there. You want to make sure that your seal stays exactly how it's supposed to be as it's going back on. Shouldn't be any sort of lip you see coming through or any protruding. Now you don't want to beat on this at all. You want to do this nice and light. It should push back on just a little bit easier than that. I'm not sure exactly what we got going on. I was just giving it a little love tap there. Get it to going. I'm just kind of working it back and forth, trying to see what it's getting hung up on. At this point, I'm not really sure. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything that's getting hung up on. I'm going to take it back out and see what we're missing. I'm not seeing anything. Try this again. Seems like it just gets to about right there and doesn't want to go much further. It's not where any of it starts to go together. So again, you don't want to try to force that. If you try to force it, you will break something. There's something there holding something up at this point is what's going on. That's the only option. I'm not exactly sure what at this point, but something is holding it up. All right, it kind of felt like it went down like it should have there. Okay, strange issue. Don't have those very often with something like this. I'm not seeing anything there, nothing damaged or anything like that. It looks like the gasket's still in good shape. Everything's wanting to go back together well. Now usually they go on quite a bit further before you have to start turning the shaft, but I'm going to go ahead and rotate the shaft while I'm trying to put it on there and see if that helps anything. Sometimes that'll get you a nice and easy way of doing it. If you go ahead and rotate it, I like to just put a rag up through, and I do have the spark plug out at this point, so I'm just kind of lightly pushing as I'm turning the shaft. Yeah, she's not wanting to go back on. Oh, there it went. I just barely tapped it again and it went right back down in there. So now it's almost sealed. It's got just a tiny bit till it hits the bottom, and now is where you usually want to turn it. Once you turn it, it'll usually just suck right down on there the rest of the way. And again, you don't want to try to force anything because that's going to break something. Don't sit here and just try to hammer on this thing and hope that hopefully that's going to fix your issue, because it's not. A few light taps would be just fine. There we go. There we go. A few light taps will be just fine, but again, don't brute force your way into it. That's not going to solve anything on something like this. It's not going to get you where you want to go. All it's going to get you is into a position where you've ruined something. Go ahead and tighten our bolts back up. Now these, you can look up the torque spec and all that good stuff. Everyone tells you, oh yeah, torque them down exactly how they need to be. Well, this impact that I've got here, it torques them almost exactly where they need to be. Not worried about that whatsoever. Anyone who's done these will tell you on something bigger, when you're dealing with a 2-cylinder or a huge engine or something like that, you want to torque them 100% to spec. That's all fine and dandy, but something like this, you're not going to run into any issues. And we don't like to tighten them up the first time you go around. You just want to barely go to tight, and then you want to work your way around from there. Do not over tighten these, as it is going into aluminum, and you will strip them out. Now I did have the plug out in order to do that, in order to turn that over. It makes it easy, and the only reason I wrapped a rag around it was just so it didn't scratch the shaft or anything like that. I wasn't really cranking down on it as you would have to do if the plug was in. Now this is a BPR 6ES that they've got in these. A lot of these similar style engines actually take a I think it's a BPR 6HS, which is quite a bit shorter. So you want to be very mindful when you're doing this, you've got the right plug in there, because if you put that other plug in, I've seen it with customers before, you run right into issues. You run into an issue where it pops a hole right in the piston. Alright, and you don't really want to put the plug back on right now. I'll keep the plug wire off just for the heck of it. I did go ahead and clean the carburetor while we had it all apart like that. Now we can go ahead and put the dipstick back in here on the other side. And the more you clean up, the less you're gonna get down in there and the more longevity you're gonna get out of your unit. Clean everything as well as you can. Gonna help you a lot. Okay, so we've got all that replaced at this point. All we need to do is put this thing back together and we'll be all set and ready to go. So I did clean up also over here. Got the deck cleaned up a little bit. Just all the excess stuff. If we grab the engine, throw it back on. What I like to do is I like to get that one closest to us here as far as the bolt goes. If we get it started up underneath, it's real easy. If you get that started, then you can just go ahead and from there tip it up and get to the rest of the unit. Get to all the rest of the bolts without really having to try to teeter this thing off to the side. As soon as that's started, there, now I can go ahead and tip this thing up. Okay, and once it's tipped up, I can go ahead and start my other bolts. I guess I was thinking that went up underneath, but it doesn't look like that's the case. Looks like that actually sits on top. Sure does. We can get our other bolts started too, so that engine's not really teetering around. It's actually in the right spot that it needs to go by the time we get it tipped over. Just makes it a little easier on you if you do it that way. I'm going to go ahead and plug in up top here while I'm at it. Just plug back in that connection. Alright, so we got those two bolts started. And we don't have any oil or anything in it yet, of course. Alright. Perfect. Alright. Now our belt back on, just sits kind of like that. We can proceed to put everything else back together at this point. Now if you pull and hold here as you're pushing this up on, it'll keep that out of the way of the keeper. And that'll go all the way to the back of the unit. Just gonna lightly tap on here. Okay. Almost doesn't look like it's quite seated down in there like it should be. It is, okay. Just trying to make sure. Now some anti-seize goes a long way on here. It's already got a nice fresh coating on it, so I'm not going to worry too much about it at this point. But if yours is dry, go ahead and throw some anti-seize on there. And when you go to this one, you want to make sure this belt is to the outside as you're putting it on. That way it goes all the way down in there. That way it connects all the way. So that's all the way to the outside, meaning it's not pulled tight against the inside. Okay. And that will go up on like such. And then there's a little tab here for your spring, which comes up and get to the back side of this one. And then hook your other one to the other side, just like they came off. So this one hooks just on the back side there. And that one's on the other side. We come up here. And it's kind of hard to get all this together with that tension on there. So what I like to do is just keep it off for a minute so we get that all the way tight. Now we can go ahead and tighten our bolt down on the front, or nut down on the front. Great. I think that was the one that was a 7/8 if I remember correctly. It is. Let's tighten him up. Okay. Now that should all fit in freely. Your belt shouldn't be stuck or anything there when you're getting him. right. So then we've got, now you'll have to kind of pull this out as you put that there to get that brake back attached. And then we'll get our 14mm. I was looking for that nut a minute ago, but it was actually inside the socket still, so that's good. Guess I gotta hold the back side like I told you to do when we were taking it off, huh? Now, I'm not gonna worry about scraping this deck or doing any of that stuff right now. If you guys don't know how to do that, you probably shouldn't be doing that. That's something where I'm actually gonna estimate a new blade for them also. This blade's in pretty bad shape. Now the lip goes up in there first. You wanna make sure that your cables are on the inside, and then it goes up in that lip. Everything will pop together here, pop up through. For these clips, just kind of pop into place. Well, if it's going on there right, they do. Let's see, looks like we're stuck on something. Oh yeah, this one's not going up under. There we go. So now we're all good to go there, and we can proceed to put the last couple pieces back on. That blade's pretty well toast, so I'm gonna give him a buzz and say, hey, we need to get this going. I didn't realize it was that bad when we originally checked that out, otherwise I would have estimated it the first time. You might just tell me to sharpen it though, you never know. Okay, so all we really need now at this point is we need to get some gas and some oil in the thing, and we can fire it up, figure out exactly what we got going on, make sure everything's good. Takes about 20 ounces or somewhere right in there of oil. We use a 10W30 synthetic blend for this. Oop. Takes apparently just under that much gas, so you don't overflow it. Put the plug wire back on at this point. Okay. I usually like to throw about 18 ounces in it to start off with. A lot of times they say 20 ounces and it really only takes about 18. I don't think a lot of these manufacturers really know. I think somebody else actually writes their service manuals for them. Yeah, so even at about 18, it's shown quite a bit fuller than what it should be. So put too much oil in it, you can blow out gaskets like crazy, just too much pressure in the crankcase. Right. So go ahead and back off a little here. Let's see what we got. Now I did not put the two in the top here. I can do that real quick. Those are the last two we got to finish this thing up. Might as well while we're at it. Before we start it, keep that guide in place. Things all running good. As we take a look around the outside, I don't see any signs of any oil leaks anywhere. I don't see any signs of any oil leaks on the bottom or anything like that. Now you want to run this for a little while and just make sure that is the case. Make sure you didn't miss anything or anything like that. I did turn the RPM up a little bit just to make sure it was a little bit low. I'll double check with a tack here real shortly before we actually send it out to the customer. But before that, I'm going to call and see if he wants this blade done. Get the rest of that cleaned out up underneath. But that'll get your PTO seal and your crankcase gasket replaced on these TXP 159s. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe.